For nearly as long as video games have existed, the racing game has stood as a monument to state-of-the-art technology, an opportunity to dazzle audiences with vividly realized automobiles gliding smoothly across virtual highways. As this technology evolved, so too did the representation of driving itself. More advanced physics enabled increasingly realistic simulations, while faster graphics architecture enabled vivid recreations of the world around us. Over the past several decades, as each new console was launched, racing games would inevitably appear to demonstrate why you needed that machine. Microsoft followed this very same strategy from day one. When it launched the first two Xbox consoles, it did it with a pair of entries in the spectacular Project Gotham Racing series. Years later, when unleashing the Xbox One and eventually the Xbox One X, the more realistic Forza Motorsport series served as its arbiter of power. The latest generation of Xbox, however, did not launch with such a game. Yes, there were racing games, of course, but nothing that really served as a showcase of the new hardware. That changes today. Deep in the heart of the UK, one team has continued to explore the potential combination of these two series, perfectly blending the realism of Forza Motorsport with the pseudo-arcade-like sensibilities of Project Gotham Racing. That series is Forza Horizon, and with the release of the fifth game in the series, we finally have our showpiece for Xbox Series X. This is Forza Horizon 5. The defining structure of Forza Horizon 5, and every prior entry in this series for that matter, is the marriage of driving and open-world exploration. Players are plunged into an expansive map packed full of races and events. Participation, or in fact simply reaching these events, allows players to drive a wide range of powerful vehicles along the way. To make this work effectively, the game needs to render large open areas that are both visually striking, yet highly legible, while also retaining near-field detail capable of showcasing both the cars themselves and the environment. Oh, and it needs to do all of this at 200 miles per hour. Forza Horizon 5 does each of these things better than any prior entry in the series, as you might expect. The cars and nearby environment are far more detailed, while distant objects retain a suitably rich silhouette. This is without a doubt one of the most visually impressive racing games we've played at Digital Foundry. To that end, Forza Horizon 5 effectively demonstrates what I discussed during this video's introduction sequence. It serves as a showpiece for the next generation of Xbox consoles. So, what I'd like to do today is look closely at the visual features on offer in this game. To do this, I've broken up the discussion into discrete parts: the cars, the environment, the atmosphere, and the audio. Before we examine these topics, however, I'd like to first touch on the nature of this release and how it compares against prior versions of Forza Horizon, as well as discuss the console-specific details. You see, while I feel that Forza Horizon 5 effectively showcases what the new platform can do, I do feel there is still some room to grow, and that's a good thing. This is, after all, a cross-gen release. You can play Forza Horizon 5 on an Xbox One console purchased in 2013, and it will run. In fact, we have an entirely separate video focusing on those differences if you're interested, but I want to begin with this. This being Forza Horizon 2. It was released in 2014 and exists on both the then new Xbox One as well as the Xbox 360, home of the original Forza Horizon. This game is cross-gen, just like the new Forza Horizon 5. The reason I bring this up is simple: to demonstrate how far we've come. You see, for 2014, Forza Horizon 2 was a handsome game, but when viewed through a modern lens, the limitations are laid bare. The lighting, the materials, distant detail, and overall scene complexity is dramatically less convincing than the games that would follow, even on the same hardware. So basically, Forza Horizon 2 is what Playground Games could deliver early in the life cycle of Xbox One, and Forza Horizon 5 is what they could deliver early in the life cycle of the Xbox Series X. Now, most of the footage you've seen thus far was indeed captured on Xbox Series X. In fact, this serves as the basis for everything we're about to discuss. When it was first revealed earlier this year, there was some confusion around its display modes, and finally we can clarify this for the final release of the game, both running on Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. So, there are two modes here, a quality mode and a performance mode. This applies to both Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. On both of these machines, quality mode runs at 30 frames per second with an increased level of visual detail, while performance mode opts instead for 60 frames per second with a slight reduction to overall detail. But what does this mean for the player? Well, when played on Xbox Series X, selecting quality mode enables a full 3840 by 2160 rendering resolution with 4x MSAA. It is in fact native 4K at all times, and is essentially using just about the highest level of detail levels available. If you prefer 60 frames per second, however, image quality remains surprisingly competitive when using the performance mode. The loss in fidelity is really relatively minor. The game continues to aim for native 4K rendering where possible, but leans on dynamic resolution scaling when not to ensure steady performance. This can produce dips in resolution as low as 1600p in the worst case scenario, which is actually not bad. Furthermore, things like motion blur quality are reduced slightly, one notch down from Ultra, though the long shutter speed remains thankfully, and there is a slight reduction in overall scene detail with more aggressive LOD management, among other things. Overall, however, image quality is generally very solid. I would have enjoyed an option for temporal anti-aliasing to clean up some of the distance shimmering, but it's still one of the sharpest games we've seen yet on the new console. Now, on Xbox Series S, this machine also delivers solid results, given the reduction in available resources. When using quality mode, the resolution tops out at 1440p, with DRS enabled, producing a minimum of 1080p in the worst case. Performance mode, however, reveals a more significant gulf, with the maximum resolution topping out at 1080p, with DRS dropping as low as 810p in the absolute worst case scenario. The other consoles are discussed in the platform comparison video that may or may not be live by the time you watch this video if you're interested. Now, while we're discussing the consoles themselves, we should also quickly touch on performance metrics. Between myself and Richard, we've played a dozen or so hours of Forza Horizon 5, and this is without a doubt one of the most consistent console games we've ever sampled. When played on Xbox Series X, the quality mode delivers a completely stable 30 frames per second, while the performance mode manages to reach a completely stable 60 frames per second. At least most of the time, it is possible to see a single frame dip here or there, but it's extremely rare. It's most likely to occur in this jungle section. This is definitely another case of a game that is somewhat dull for performance analysis, which ends up being a very good thing for players. It's a remarkable achievement on the part of the developers. And thankfully, the same is also true for Xbox Series S as well. You get the same completely stable 30 frames per second while using quality mode, and a completely stable 60 frames per second when using the performance mode. The point is, no matter which platform you're playing on, you can expect very consistent performance, which is what you really want in a racing game like this. The other element of performance, though, I should mention is the loading, and this is one area where the advantage of the SSD shines through. Forza Horizon 4 exhibited some lengthy loading times at points throughout the game that could become a little tedious. Forza Horizon 5 mostly solves this. It's not instantaneous as we've seen with some other games this generation, but it's dramatically faster than prior entries in the series, and it makes moving between events far more seamless. When it comes to last-gen Xbox One, well, you'll have to wait and see in that video. So that establishes the basics of what you can expect from a new generation of Xbox consoles, at least in terms of metrics. But now, I'd like to step back and explore in greater detail that which makes the game really shine, starting with the vehicles. At the core of Forza Horizon 5, you have the cars that you drive. The game features a wide range of vehicles to choose from, and despite the densely packed environments around you, the level of detail exhibited with each car impresses. There's also a huge selection of cars to choose from, and this is where the partnership between Turn 10 and Playground Games really works in its favor. Essentially, the cars are created for the more simulation and detail-focused Forza Motorsport, and they can be used directly in Forza Horizon. Playground does have some control over the car designs, of course, and are free to modify aspects. However they're made, the thing that impresses me most about this game is what I mentioned earlier. Essentially, we have cars that were created first and foremost to support a closed-circuit racing game in Forza Motorsport, but these same cars are used within a game that is much larger in scope. It's a beautiful combination. Now, when examining the vehicles, I started by looking at models available exclusively in Forza Horizon 5. After all, many of the cars featured in this game are also present in Forza Motorsport 7 or Forza Horizon 4, but there are some new inclusions. One of the new cars added to the game is the gorgeous new Toyota Supra. This collaboration between Toyota and BMW has resulted in a beautiful take on the classic Supra design, and it's well represented here. The finish on the paint with the clear coat is perfect and realistically scatters light across the surface. To further improve rendering of the cars, Playground added bent normals to the game at last. The key benefit to using bent normals stems from the improvements to lighting and shading. Specifically, when you look at areas around the bumper, for instance, you can see the benefit with improved shadowing in occluded areas. It's a very nice inclusion. When viewing the cars in Forza Vista or when using photo mode at very specific locations, ray tracing is enabled. Now, of course, we've lamented the fact that ray tracing is not available during the game, and this includes the PC version, by the way. But at least it does provide a nice visual benefit in these modes specifically thanks to self-reflection. You can actually see the mirrors or the wheels reflecting accurately in the body of the car. When looking so closely though, you can also appreciate detail that has gone into things such as the brake rotor textures or the tires itself. The bodywork is also simply sublime, with detail right down to smoothly rounded parking sensors. Interiors are also of good quality, comparable again to Forza Motorsport 7 but with some improved shading. Everything from the buttons on the steering wheel, the labels on the shifter, to the buttons across the center stack, it looks remarkably good. All of this holds true for the cars I've examined, so they all look great, but even if you stop during normal play, the cars simply driving around the world are also surprisingly detailed. Now, of course, during actual racing, there is some LOD management happening. This is normal for any racing game like this, but on Xbox Series X, especially in quality mode, it's actually rather difficult to see during normal racing. They've done an excellent job maintaining this high perceived level of detail throughout every race. The point here is that car rendering is superb and on par with more focused driving simulators with closed track environments. Plus, the new improvements to the engine allow these vehicles to shine brighter than ever. But the cars only account for part of the visual experience. The environments are just as important. The strength of Forza Horizon as a series lies in its depiction of dramatic locales around the world where players can drive basically anywhere, and Mexico is one of the best choices we've seen thus far. The sense of scale is vast, with a huge variation in height unlike anything we've seen in the series before. The technology supports this new environment very well. But to best appreciate this scale, we need to start small. For this segment, I'd like to look at individual elements which I found impressive and discuss how some of these things were done, beginning with the ground itself. During normal gameplay, the tarmac and terrain beneath your tires whiz by at a ridiculous speed, lost in the blur applied while driving. But if you actually stop and look closely, there's a surprising amount of detail to appreciate. Firstly, there's the road surface itself, which is as detailed as you would expect in a driving game, but the developers have taken things a little further this time by integrating parallax occlusion maps into the terrain surface itself. This basically allows for proper height and perspective on otherwise flat surfaces, increasing the sense of realism. You can really see it here with the small imperfections in the road fully visible in 3 dimensions. Another comparable technique, cone step mapping, is also used in this game, but that is applied to building materials and walls and such, and this only applies when using the quality mode. You can really see it shine though on this small wall here. The stones now have proper depth and shadow. But when you take your vehicle off-road, things impress even more. Actual geometry is combined with the terrain to increase depth in certain scenes, but it's the way in which the procedurally painted ground system works that really blew me away. Take a look at this forest floor. Now this is not an area you would normally spend time driving around, though you have the option. But the depth and quality on display here is simply superb, with individual pine cones, leaves, pine needles, and branches scattered about in a realistic fashion. Beyond this, screen space shadows are also used to accentuate small plants within the ground structure itself. Essentially, what we have here is the result of what Playground calls their recipe system, in which multiple texture layers and in fact meshes can be combined and then painted across the landscape. Series X in quality mode can have up to 5 layers combined to create a complex material like you see. When painting the landscape, the properties of these results are even considered. When grass or other types of foliage are painted, for instance, this has an impact on the car physics. It's automatically considered by the engine. Basically, the combination of procedural generation and these recipes allow artists to quickly and carefully create highly realistic environments. So while a lot of the work is done procedurally, the artists have the option to go in and very carefully touch up any area in the world that they like. So it ends up having this highly crafted feel despite its large size. Then there's the foliage system itself. The developers have paid close attention to the way trees and plants react in this game. Firstly, there's a new light penetration system in place which impacts how light passes through the leaves. Note the impact of sunlight on this tree. It's now much more physically correct. You can actually see the light piercing individual leaves. Beyond this, the foliage bending system has been enhanced so that different types of trees bend and sway correctly in the wind. This is especially important for things like palm trees with their sturdy trunk and flailing branches. It allows for a highly dynamic presentation, especially when driving through a storm. Beyond this, another key improvement in Horizon 5 lies in its reliance on more detailed environmental meshes, most noticeably rock formations. This allows for a massive increase in the perception of scene detail, with jagged and smooth rock formations alike defining the areas of the terrain. And as always, there's towns and cities scattered across the map, but the average level of detail for buildings has been increased from earlier entries in the series, as has the actual density of them. There are now more objects and active elements present in each of these scenes, allowing the environment to feel detailed enough that it could actually support just walking around on foot. These are just some of the elements featured throughout the game, and they're all used to create various biomes that you'll explore during the course of the adventure. From the tightly packed jungle environments to the massive scale of an active volcano, there is a lot to see here. The main thing that really helps sell this environment is the sense of visibility you get. You see, in prior games there was always this sense that the hills around you limited your overall view of an area, reducing the sense of scope. But with Horizon 5, there are so many more vistas, allowing you to see far out into the distance. This alone helps create a more enjoyable world to explore. But there's more to rendering this world than raw geometric detail. From weather effects to lighting and shadow, the atmosphere in Forza Horizon 5 is defined by a series of changes and improvements made to core rendering systems. First and foremost, one of the most significant changes made to the renderer lies in the introduction of a new approach to global illumination. Gone is the voxelized grid solution of the prior game, and instead it has been replaced with what they call a Surfal GI, or Surface-Driven Global Illumination System. This boulder is a good example, showcasing the GI in action, with the color of the ground properly reflected in the underside of the large rock. But how does it actually work? Essentially, the GI data is generated based on the normal direction and albedo of surfaces, and is placed using a procedural probe system. This probe system, however, has a set of rules applied, allowing the developer to more strategically move probes to concentrate around key areas, such as the entrance to a tunnel or clustered around buildings. It's an automatic system, but artists have the ability to adjust it as they see fit. This data is baked, but thanks to a compute shader utilized at runtime, it's possible to combine this with the real-time lighting conditions to create a hybrid of sorts, which means we get proper bounce lighting where appropriate, with reduced light leakage, while still maintaining a full time of day system. The solution also works on last-gen machines, but on Xbox Series X the resolution of the GI data is quadrupled, so it's much higher in quality. The quality of the indirect lighting combines with the exceptional PBR materials, leading to some highly realistic scenes that almost pass the tiny picture test, viewing a screenshot of the game on your phone or at a smaller size, and almost believing that you're looking at a photograph, at least at first glance. Forza Horizon 5 also makes use of large-scale ambient occlusion, which helps properly shadow occluded areas without creating the impression of ugly black outlines. This AO pass helps give the impression of darker jungles or shadows and crevices around your vehicle. Another major stride for this game lies in its weather systems then. During the game, you'll encounter a range of weather conditions, including dramatic sandstorms as well as rain, but what's new in Horizon 5 is the way in which this is communicated to the player. Primarily, the sky system now properly reflects incoming weather conditions. You'll see clouds change and swirl above you as the storm very realistically rolls across the landscape. The scene darkens, clouds thicken, and raindrops inevitably begin to fall. This moment, just before the rainfall, is in fact one of my favorite weather conditions in real life, and I was surprised at how well this game manages to capture that feeling, especially when utilizing HDR. Another element of the rain are the puddles. These gradually form, resulting in visible reflections, while droplets appear on both cars and across water surfaces. Rain contributes greatly to the atmosphere of the game, but also has an impact on gameplay, as traction is reduced. The sandstorm then is perhaps a little more extreme. Like the rain, you can see the storm from a distance, and up until a certain point, it relies on particles to display the incoming sand. Once you drive directly into it, however, the game transitions to a fully volumetric style fog, something that is used throughout the game in various other conditions as well, it should be noted. Particles are also properly lit and more coherent within the environment, at least on Xbox Series X, as is evidenced during the introduction sequence near the volcano. Look at the smoke pouring from the center point. But really, we're just scratching the surface of what the game has to offer visually, and if you play it, you'll see what I mean, I'm certain. By now though, we've taken a closer look at the vehicles, the world detail, and the light and atmosphere populating it, but there's one more important point I want to discuss regarding the presentation, and that is the audio. Sound. For my money, this is one of the most important pieces in any game's presentation. A perfectly crafted soundscape or soundtrack can elevate even a middling game to new heights, while pushing a great game towards the heavens. This is especially true for racing games where both the soundtrack and the sound effects must be used in perfect harmony to push the player to their maximum performance and enjoyment. Forza Horizon 5 delivers this at various levels, ranging from the music selection to the sound processing to the raw sound itself. So firstly, the audio uses a form of software ray tracing to properly simulate audio collision within the environment. The developers can mark up different pieces of scenery to denote the material type, i.e. metal, wood, concrete, and the like, and then the sound responds correctly to the material. It bounces around the environment in a way that these different areas will produce a different sound response. It's also possible for the game to alter sound based on whether the source is occluded, so a car behind a large building will produce a sound different than one left out in the field. This is combined with a superlative Dolby Atmos soundscape that makes excellent use of height channels, if you have them installed in your home theater system, of course. I obviously cannot demonstrate this in a YouTube video, but basically, consider the sound of rain or wind enveloping the room as you drive, in addition to the sound of objects whizzing by at high speeds. It's extremely effective. Beyond this, the game also makes active use of the LFE channel with extremely rich, deep bass that is at times room-shaking. But for me, one of the most important elements here goes beyond the technical aspects of the audio and focuses more on the music, and more specifically the timing of the music. This is what impresses me the most. During normal play, you of course have various radio stations to choose from with different racing appropriate music, as always, but it's during the special events that the game uses specific tracks to set the tone, and the way in which the music lines up with the action that you control is supremely powerful.
Drop zone approaching! Lovely day for a drive! Track the storm! No sigue adelante! Keep going!
Strap yourselves in, Horizon! I've seen this driver before, and trust me, they know how to make an entrance!
And we have company! Meet my compadres!
The entire soundscape works to strengthen this emotional bond with the experience of driving, which fundamentally is what driving is really all about, at least for me. It successfully captures that feeling I felt from playing Outrun in the arcade so many years ago, that perfect blend of sound, visuals, and handling. Or even something more like SSX3 with its mountainside festival-like atmosphere. It's powerful stuff. Now, of course, you don't need a surround sound setup to appreciate the game's audio, but this is certainly one of those cases where I strongly recommend it if you have access to one. Okay though, with that said, we have now covered the 4 key areas which I believe define the presentation, at least in some light detail. But is there anything else? Well, the one last thing I wanted to mention here concerns the HDR presentation. The actual HDR implementation is very good indeed, but the game does not support the newly introduced Dolby Vision mode offered on Xbox consoles. It simply forces itself into HDR10 mode, no matter what, which is a little unexpected, I must admit. Ultimately, Forza Horizon 5 delivers exactly what I had expected and hoped for based on the series' pedigree and quality. But I also expect more from the team once they fully transition entirely over to the new Series X and Series S consoles. But I can say that, at least for now, this is perhaps the single most impressive example of a cross-generation game I've played to date. They made all the right calls in building the Series X version of the game, and it really shines. I was also impressed with just how responsive it is. When I loaded up Forza Horizon 2, for instance, it was immediately clear that the game itself just feels somewhat leggy to play. The cars are heavy. But with Forza Horizon 5, whether you're in quality mode at 30 frames per second or in performance mode at 60, the handling remains shockingly crisp and responsive. It just feels really good to play. Now, of course, this is not a review of the game, but if it were, I think you can tell by now that I absolutely loved it. I'm not ashamed to admit that non-simulation racing games are among my favorite experiences in all of gaming, and Forza Horizon 5 is one of the best of its kind. With that, however, we've reached the end of this specific video. There is additional Forza Horizon 5 content on the way, or already out depending on when you watch this one. But if you enjoyed it, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, check out our Patreon for a high quality version of it, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John, driving off into the horizon.